In this video, I'm going to show you how to use SQL to create a table in an SQLite database. Suppose we want to store some people's names and email addresses in a database. Well, once we've created the database, the next step is to create a table to hold that information. This is how we might think of such a table. Now, recall from reading in your textbook that a table is organized into rows and columns. It's sort of like a spreadsheet. Here you can see that each row contains a complete set of information about some item. And the rows are divided into columns, and the columns store the individual pieces of information. To illustrate this, you can see that this first row contains the information for Katie Allen. It's got her name and her email address. We also have this contact ID number stored here. So this first column is the contact ID column. The next column is the name column. It contains people's names. And then the last column is the email column, which contains our people's email addresses. Now, columns have data types, and in our design, this first column, the contact ID column, that's going to be our primary key, and its data type is integer. The name column is a text column, which simply means that it holds strings. And the last column, the email column, is also a text column. It holds strings as well. Now, not only do the columns have to have names, but the table has to have a name as well. So we could name our table the contacts table. Now, how do we create this table in SQL? Well, we're going to use the SQL statement create table, and this is the general format of the create table statement. We start with the words create table, and then that's followed by the name of the table, and then inside of parentheses we simply have a list of all of our column names and their data types. For this specific table, the create table statement would look like this: create table, contacts, and then inside the parentheses we have our list of columns. Now, the first column here, contact ID, this is a special case because it's our primary key. So you can see that we have these modifiers. We have the data type. Contact ID is an integer. But then following the data type, we have the primary key modifier, which simply means that this is our primary key, and that's followed by the not null modifier, which means that we never want this column to contain a null value. It would be an error to have a primary key that's set to null. So that's the first column. We've got a comma there, and then the next column, the name column, is listed, and it's a text data type, comma, and then we have our email column, which is also a text column. So this is the SQL statement to create this table, but how do we execute that in Python? Well, we have to use the cursor object. Now, you'll recall from the previous video and from your textbook reading that when you create a database or when you connect to a database, one of the things that you have to do is get a cursor object. And the cursor object has a method named execute. And you call this method to execute an SQL statement. You simply pass a string that contains the SQL statement. For example, let's say that we have the following code in our Python program. Let's assume that we've already connected to the database, and we're ready to create our table. So here we have our SQL statement in a string. This is a triple quoted string. Now you'll see that a lot in this chapter in the textbook, and you might recall that in Python, a triple quoted string is a string that can span multiple lines in your source code. So you just start the string with 3 quotation marks, and then you just type the string exactly the way that you want it. You can have new line characters, whatever, and then you end the string with a set of triple quotes. This is a very convenient way to write SQL statements because they can be rather long sometimes, and they span multiple lines. So here we have our create table statement stored as a string, and we're assigning it to this variable SQL string. And then here we're assuming that we have a cursor object named cur, and we're calling its execute method, and we're passing our variable SQL string. So that will cause this SQL statement to be executed on our database. Another way to do this is to skip the whole step of creating a string variable and just embed the string, the triple quoted string, in our statement that calls the execute method. We're just passing it as an argument directly to the method. Okay, well, let's demonstrate how the code works using the Python shell. First, I'm going to import the SQLite3 module, and then I'm going to create the contacts database. And I'll do that by getting a connection to the database. Remember that when you get a connection to an SQLite database, if that database does not already exist, it'll be created at that point. So we'll write this statement, SQLite3 dot connect, and then I'm going to create this database in a specific location on my system. I'm using a Windows system, and for that reason, I'm going to write a raw string here to give me the path of my database. C:/users/Tony/databases. I have a folder named databases there on my system, and I'm going to call the database file contacts.db. Okay, so that created the database. And just a refresher about these raw strings. Anytime you have a string that is preceded by the letter R, it means that it's a raw string which does not process escape sequences. So it's very convenient when you're writing Windows paths because we have these backslashes in a Windows path. And it just means that we don't have to write double slashes right there. Okay, so we've got our connection object. So now we're going to get a cursor object. And our cur variable is referencing the cursor object. So now we're going to create the table. So we're going to call the cur.execute method, and as an argument, I'm just going to pass the SQL statement as a string. Just pass it as an argument straight to the method. So I'm going to write this as a triple quoted string. We're going to create a table named contacts, and then the first column is our contact ID column. It is an integer. It is a primary key, and we're going to specify not null. Okay, that's the first column. The second column is the name column. It's a text column. And then the third column is the email column, which is also text. Okay, and I'll close the parenthesis, triple quotes, and then a closing parenthesis for the method. Okay, so this message here, when you see this message, that indicates that this statement successfully did something. Okay, and don't forget to commit your changes, and then we are going to close our connection. Okay, so that successfully created our database, and it created our table in the database. Now we did all that in the shell. Now let's look at a Python program that does these things. So here's a complete Python program that I've written called create table. Here we have our import statement that imports the SQLite 3 module. Here we have the definition of a main function, and then the code here at the bottom executes the main function. Now in the main function, first we connect to our database, and once again I've specified an absolute path on my Windows system where I want the database created. Here in this statement, I'm getting my cursor object. Here in this statement, I'm executing my SQL create table statement using the cursor objects execute method. Here I am committing the changes. I'm calling the connection objects commit method, and then here I'm closing the database connection by calling the connection objects close method.